Hey everybody, this is Luke with Hanson's Coaching Services, and I just wanted to go through the blog post that is accompanying this, and I just wanted to actually go into it with you a little bit here. So today we're talking about getting what you need, obtaining the desired effect of workouts. And recently, probably the last one I did was adapting to training, where we really focused on how long it actually takes to adapt to a workload. So if you remember, it's that 4 to 6 week kind of time period. Along with that, I discussed the problem of getting too fit too fast and how that can be detrimental as far as, if you're still 12, 14 weeks away and you're in 95% of the shape you need to be in or 98% of the shape you need to be in, that might not bode well those last 3 months of training. So we talked about that, and today I want to supplement those ideas with two more parts to this whole kind of idea of adapting to training and getting the effects of the work that you're doing. The first is that desired effect out of a specific workout. So knowing exactly what you're trying to accomplish with each workout. And the second is avoiding the idea that every workout is the most important. And that second part is something that I took a long time, uh, especially once I got into the professional level where everybody was better than me, and so I kind of took on the idea that I needed to crush all my workouts, and I think in the long term it actually probably hurt me a little bit, and I feel like I probably overcooked myself and left a lot of my best performances in workouts. And so if you focus on something, know what to focus on and when to focus on it, and we'll get into that a little bit too. But the vast majority of this is knowing what you need to get out of each workout, and that'll actually help with that second part too. Is once you know what you're trying to get done, then you'll know, okay, is this a workout I really need to get after or not? Okay, so first one is easy days, and it's the biggest component of our training, but it's also probably the most misunderstood. The term junk mileage is thrown around a ton. So, but there's definitely a couple problems I see with easy days, and I see it across the board, beginners to elite runners. So, the first is that the runner will fail to see their importance for overall development. For instance, I just got an email from a runner who's going to take part of one schedule, a 50-mile-a-week schedule, and take parts from a bigger schedule, which was a 75-mile-a-week schedule, and combine them. And so you can guess what parts he was going to take from each schedule. So he basically wanted the short, easy runs of the 50-mile-a-week program and the big workouts of the 75-mile-a-week program. And so I actually see this a lot. People will try to combine, and the automatic thought is that I need more workouts and less easy runs, and that's definitely not the case for most people. Um, so essentially, the problem with that is at the lower mileage, if he does the easy runs based off the lower mileage schedule and the workouts off the higher mileage schedule, that throws off the ratio of things that we've talked about in the past. So like, for instance, a long run should be 25 to 30% of your weekly mileage. Well, now if he's taking that bigger long run from a 75-mile-a-week program and throwing it into a 50-mile-a-week program, then that percentage is going to be off, right? So what was 25% in 75 miles a week is going to be much higher in a 50-mile-a-week program. So all those ratios get thrown off, and then easy runs are now made less important because of that. And so that's not always the case. Um, so it's an easy mistake to make, because we would all naturally assume that if we can tolerate more work, we should. However, if we can't handle the foundational work of easy running first, the harder work will only ultimately bring you down. And if you struggle with the idea that easy mileage is junk mileage, then you're going to limit how high that ceiling can be. So, it's like a pyramid. That pyramid can only be as big as the foundation below it. And so when you try to attack it from the top down, you really are limited by a ceiling that's already established. That ceiling, you're only going to be able to maximize where that ceiling's already at. You're not going to be able to really raise that ceiling anymore. But if you have a bigger foundation and a bigger base, everything kind of tapers up, and you can get a much taller ceiling. So hopefully that makes sense. And I stress that all the time. But running the easy mileage is key to overall development, especially for something like the marathon, where it's a 99% aerobic event, and the vast majority of what you need is going to come from marathon pace and slower. And the rest of that is stuff we work on within other segments. So hopefully that makes sense. And the second problem I see is that the paces I prescribe. So let's say we give you a schedule and you have an easy 5 miles at your easy to moderate pace. And let's say that's just 8-minute miles to 9 30-minute miles. Early on, runners will tend to be on the faster side of the spectrum, and I do this too. We're not doing anything intense. We're fresh. We're ready to go. We're excited. We tend to be pushing that 8-minute miles all the time instead of saying, hey, I have a whole range here of 8 to 9:30. It's okay if I'm 9:15 pace one day. We all do it early on. We tend to hammer away. So, however, once we get into the schedule more, these paces should slow down because we're doing more work on top of that, right? So if we spend 4 weeks of just running mileage and then all of a sudden we start doing 2 or 3 workouts a week, then that easy mileage is going to naturally tend to slow down because we're just going to be more fatigued from all the other stuff that we're doing. So my thing is I don't know how many times runners have freaked out because their easy runs have slowed down once the heavy training has kicked in. So they really tried to force the issue, and going back to that 8 to 9:30 pace, if all their easy runs were 8-minute pace early on, and now they're tired from all the other workouts and they still try to hit that 8-minute pace, then they're being detrimental to their overall development. That's only going to lead them into becoming injured or overtrained or just so fatigued that they have to back down for a little bit. So backing off of that and being just as long as you're in that range, you're okay. So that kind of goes into knowing what workout is the most important. But if you have that range is there to tell you you're going to get the same benefits whether it's 8:15 pace or 9:30 pace in an example that we're using. So don't feel like you have to be at the top end of that spectrum. My runs on easy days vary greatly. Like if we're okay and it's a nice day and it's a flat loop, we might average 6:30 pace. There's another day after a workout where I'm just tired and I don't feel like pushing. It might be 7:30 pace. So don't think that you're not going to get the same benefit from being slower than if you were faster. That's one thing you really have to get out of your head. That's where I see a lot of people make their biggest mistakes, is they tend to try to stay on that faster end of the pace spectrum and not allow themselves to be all over in that range and still get the same effect. Your easy runs are more about time on your feet than hammering at the top end of your easy pace range. So don't get caught up imagining your easy runs paces every single time. So then the next thing we can move on to is long runs, which is really just an extension of an easy day, except for the pure amount of time that we're on our feet running. So pace-wise, we're using nearly the same pace range. For some people, we get a little bit faster. I'll get down to like 30 seconds slower than marathon pace. But for most people, you're still in that, roughly 1 to 2 minutes slower than marathon pace. But as you'll see, we talked about some differences there. So now, like with all training, how we apply that stimulus will differ as our ability and experience changes. So like if you're brand new to running and you're really just starting to do long runs, our first priority with you is just building that general endurance, right? We want to get you to cover that distance. We're not worried about how fast that's going to be. And so a lot of times, and then you'll see the other side of that where, and I was part of this for a while too, was where all my long runs had to be on the very fast end of that pace range. And so you really have usually tend to have two extremes there. And some people say, oh, it's only LSD, long, slow distance, or other people say, oh, no, it's only really, MLD, which, moderate long distance. So, but the truth is that there's different things that we can do depending on where you're at in your running. Okay, so first goal of everybody is to build your general endurance, and especially with a beginner, or if you're just coming back from injury, or you're early in your training segment, or you're just plain tired, then the need for a fast long run just isn't there. It's going to be more detrimental than beneficial. And so for beginners, it should be a time to learn how to go out in an appropriate pace and avoid the crash and burn effect. So, this might be some trial and error, but ultimately what I want you to learn how to do is go out conservative and be able to at least maintain that pace the whole time, not go out real fast and then completely crash the last few miles and just have a miserable experience. So, and then also for beginners, every progressive long run they complete is probably the furthest that they've ever run, right? So a lot of times people use our beginner program and it's the first time they've run 10 miles, or it's the first time they've run 12 or 14 or 16 miles. So we simply use those long runs in that case to gain the confidence in being able to actually cover the mileage. Again, we're not worried at all about how fast it is. We're only worried about physically being able to run that far. And as for those early in a segment or coming back from a layoff, a slower long run is a great way to increase the workload and increase your fitness without putting too much stress on your currently fragile system. Think about it, you're just coming off an injury, or you're coming off from a long amount of time off. You're not ready to hammer on anything. So you as well need to just be focused on gaining that general endurance back. And it also helps us scale back that tendency to do too much too soon. And beyond that, I think most runners would agree the duration of the long run is more than enough, and running too fast might not be even possible. So what I mean by that is, if you haven't run a 16-mile long run in 3 months, just the act of doing 16 miles is probably going to be pretty tough for you. You're not necessarily even going to be worried about how fast you're running it, even if I told you to run faster. So it might not even be possible. And I think anybody who's run a segment and then taken a bunch of time off knows exactly what I'm talking about. A few days off can sometimes feel like a few years off. So then we talked about before about adapting to training and how the stimulus will need to change over time if we want to keep adapting. So eventually what I'm saying is we're going to get to the point where we're no longer a beginner. We've done the long runs. We've done the same long runs over and over and over again. Is that stimulus going to be the same to gain adaptations? And the answer is no. We ultimately will have to change some things in everything that we do. So in the long run, it's going to be, maybe it's simply increasing the distance. And that's certainly fair because, a lot of times people will go from a beginner to an advanced and then start adding mileage to an advanced plan. And then, ultimately, you can definitely change the actual volume of your longest long run. Because if you go back to the percentages rule, if you're running 60 miles a week, 16 is well within that 25 to 30%. You go up to 70 miles a week, 18 to 20 is well within that 25 to 30% range. So you can change the long run as your volume changes. But that's the first thing that's always going to change. But the point is too that there's different ways to run the same distance. So let's say you just, I'm a 60 mile a week person. I'm a 50 mile a week person. I'm going to keep them at 16. Well, how can I change that stimulus that I'm getting to further adaptation? So first thing you can do is the fasted long run. And the idea here is to purposely run your glycogen low by not eating prior to the long run, during the long run. And the idea is that you force the body to go into a state where you have to rely on fat as the primary energy source. And this will ultimately make your body better at burning fat. And for what we really care about, what you're ultimately going to be able to do is run further at a faster pace using less carbohydrate. That's ultimately what we want to do. And that, in the real practicality of that, is you're going to be able to run a faster marathon. So that is a key thing. The thing is, when do you do this? Now, I wouldn't do this in the last month of a segment. Actually, I wouldn't do this probably in the last 8 weeks of a segment. I would do this probably pretty early on. I definitely feel like it's an early segment long run. So the reason being is that when the long runs are shorter, you still have enough to deplete your glycogen store. So you're not at your peak mileage and you're not at a specific marathon workload. That we've talked about in the past, that last 6 to 8 weeks is really that, everything's focused purely on marathon specific work, strength work, long tempo runs, long runs. And so we don't want to have a long run at 16 miles where we completely fast ourselves. What we want to do is we maybe want to do those 10, 12, maybe a 14-mile long runs in those fasted states early in the segment, because what that's going to do is that's going to spur the adaptations to allow the other work in that last 6 to 8 weeks to really be benefited by the training you did in the first 6 to 8 weeks, if that makes sense. So the fasted part is going to spur the adaptations for the fat burning that we're talking about. And then once you get into where you're doing long tempo runs and you're doing faster long runs, then you're going to be able to be more equipped to handle those. And so I would definitely say those are early on, and especially because you don't want to get to the point where you're just, what I call the white dot fever. You get so hungry you're seeing white dots in front of your eyes. You don't want to be at that point after a 16-mile long run. It's one thing to be at that at a 10 or 12-mile long run, but the longer you go, the worse it's going to be. So I would definitely recommend that being an early segment type of long run, and not a beginner. This is something that is for somebody who's gone through the program at least once, or moved from the beginner to the advanced, and now are looking for different ways to obtain a stimulus. So that's who I would do it. The other key part of this is that pace does not matter. Like if the first couple times you do this, you might be like, what was I thinking? You're going to be hungry. You're not going to feel that great. It's something that is definitely going to be a change to your body. It's going to be a shock to your body. And so with that, the key to this too is you deplete yourself before and during, but after the long run, you get right on the replenishment. You start getting the carbohydrates back in. You start rehydrating. You take care of that recovery part of it. And that, because what we talk about with all this stuff is that it's not necessarily the hard work you do, it's how you recover from that hard work. And so if you're going to put yourself into a situation like that where you've really run your carbohydrate stores down, your glycogen stores down, you need to be in a position where you can get right on the replacement of those as soon as the run is done. And that instant kind of influx of carbohydrate coming in is actually going, because your body's in a really kind of a starvation mode, right? So your body wants carbohydrates, and it's like, man, I don't want to go through this again. So it's also ultimately going to help you store more carbohydrates. So if you expose it to a bunch of carbohydrates right after the run, your body's going to take full effect of that, and it's going to store as much as it can. And so over time, you'll be able to store more and more and more. And in the meantime, your body's like, well, I really don't like going through that point where I don't have carbohydrates. So I'm going to, build these mitochondria up, and I'm going to get these enzymes going, and I'm going to be able to burn more fat at a better rate. So it's definitely a multiple facet way of improving your performance. It's just not, I wouldn't do it all the time, and I would only do it early. I wouldn't do it every week though. Another thing too is you can definitely take water and electrolytes, which you should during it. You just want to stay no carbohydrate coming in. All right, so that's the fasted long run. The other thing is the long run with the fartlek. I tend to not really give these a ton, but I do in some situations. The first might be when a person is only doing 2 workouts a week, so they're only doing 1 workout during the week and then a long run or a long tempo run on the weekend. I might combine it with a long run with a fartlek, and then give them kind of 2-for-1 special on a SOS. So their Sunday long run also doubles as a marathon specific workout as well. So you can do it something like that, or alternator plans where we're doing every other week a long run or a tempo one. It might be a good substitution for that. Or when workouts are more spaced out, like our 9-day cycle plans where they have 2 days of recovery instead of just typically 1. But it's an old Boston Track Club long run, and all it is it's just a long run. So let's say 16 miles, and it will have something like, maybe 4 miles easy to moderate, getting progressively faster, and then do 8 by 2 minutes at marathon pace with 2 minutes jog between every 2 minutes at pace. So it's essentially 32 minutes of on, off, on, off, on, off. And or we'll do something like 6 by 3 minutes with 2 minutes off. So the more fit you get, the longer the marathon pace repeat will be, and then the rest interval in between will be shorter and shorter. So it might be, you might go a 2 and 2 early on and build it up to like a 5 minutes at marathon pace with 2 minutes easy in between each 5 minutes. There's a number of ways you can do it, but you just definitely want to progress into those over time. It's just simply a good way to accumulate more time at marathon pace, And I know for a lot of my runners, they like it just because it breaks up the monotony. Especially because I have a few people who really, truly do struggle with just going out and running, 10, 12, 14, 16 miles. And this is a great way to break it up for them, but it's also still an aerobic run. It's not something, if as long as they keep it at marathon pace, that's technically a high aerobic run, and it's not something that's going to be overtaxing for them, especially if we make sure the recovery is there. So I think it improves. A lot of our aerobic capacities, especially mitochondria and all the enzymes and all that good stuff. But it's also a great way to increase specific endurance or stamina. So ultimately, too, once we get to a point, we want to not just be able to cover ground, but we want to be able to cover ground at a set pace, and this will help it. Where I would schedule this is I would just give it to them a couple times in the middle of the training plan towards the beginning of the late stages. So it might be something like between 12 weeks out and 6 weeks out. I wouldn't do anything probably in that last 6 weeks, because I'm going to do a different type of long run in there. And same thing, like you don't want to give every single long run something fast in it, or whatever the case is, because ultimately you do still need to have a long run where you're just going out there, you're putting time on your feet, and you're just enjoying the weekend, right? So that's just as important as these two. These are just things you can do to shake it up. Okay, so the next thing I would talk about is the fast finish long run. And this is a great long run to really teach our body what it's like to run fast at the end of a long week when we're really tired. You know how we talk about, the way the schedule's set up is the 16 miles on the long run is really the last 16 miles of the marathon, not the first 16. And this can really put that into play too. But it's a very race specific long run, so you don't want to do this in the beginning. This is something that I'll save for 1 or 2 times in that last 6 to 8 weeks of training. It's a long run I would do in the peak training when our workloads are at the highest. And I wouldn't do it every long run. I would definitely space this out a little bit. The structure itself is pretty simple. I tend to like to prescribe these as a gradual pickup in pace, so that you're really truly practicing race day strategy. You're practicing going out conservative, gradually picking it up, and negative splitting the run. So first few miles would be nice and easy. From there, you gradually pick the pace up so that by about 2/3 of the way into your long run, you're at the top end of your moderate range. You're still in that range, but you're getting close to the top of that. Then when you get to the last 2 or 3 miles of your long run, you ratchet that pace up once more. Because ultimately, too, it's like if you're running a minute and a half slower than marathon pace, then all of a sudden you're asked to flip a switch when you're tired. That's really hard to do. So if we gradually ratchet up the pace, now we're only asking you to go up to 30 seconds instead of a minute and a half. It's easier to make a 30-minute switch or 30-second a mile switch than it is a minute and a half minute switch, especially after you've done 13 or 14 miles. So it's pretty simple to do. I think there's a couple things to this. It's a pretty tough finish, so it's not only going to give you the physiological effects, but it's also going to teach you how to be mentally tough, and it's going to teach you how to run fast even when you're tired. And that's going to give you a lot of confidence going into your marathon, knowing, man, I can be dog tired, and I know I can still find a way to get that pace in. And that's a big mental hurdle to get over. Last long run is really the long moderate distance, and this is really just a natural progression from the LSD model, long slow distance. I think for the most part, I didn't really necessarily want to put this in there, but it's more because this is more of a natural progression, right? Like you're just going to naturally get faster on your long runs once you've actually built the general endurance. The next logical step is just to get more specific with that endurance and more put more speed into that long run, using that term loosely. Like you're still within your easy pace range. You're just not necessarily worried about just covering ground, but it's like, hey, I'd like to cover this, I was making these long runs in, 8:30 pace. Now I'd like to be, under 8-minute pace for these long runs, whatever the case is. So, but I think that's just the more natural progression with that stuff. But for a beginner or even a person who has done a marathon before but was a beginner before, then this is a new stimulus to it. So it's something worth adding. But again, I think it's more of a natural progression, and you don't necessarily need to even think about it. You'll end up doing it. So the key for all these I've talked about, though, is really the recovery and replenishment, especially like I was talking about with the previous long runs. So regardless of whether you supplemented or not during the long run with gels or whatever you take, you have taken your stores to critical levels. That's just the nature of the long run, right? That's why we're doing the long run. So beginning the process of replenishing these levels will allow for adaptations we want to take place, and will allow the body to bounce back quicker to do the next workout. So it's ultimately, one, how well you can recover, and how this workout's going to affect the next workout. And that we talk about that a little bit later too. So, all right, so that's it for long runs. Tempo runs is the next thing I want to talk about. Long runs are pretty much foolproof. You go out and run for a couple hours, whatever the case is. A tempo run can get tricky. And so the goal with the marathon pace is really threefold. First, learn how your actual race pace feels at increasingly longer distance. The second, maximize the running economy, fat metabolism, and aerobic capabilities. And that's going to be most effective when you're at race pace. You get more economical at race pace when you practice race pace. The third is to gain confidence at race pace. So this last one, this was always big for me because a lot of people will focus on the long run as their source of confidence, but all that really tells you is that you can run pretty far, pretty slow, right? A tempo run, however, shows you that you can still run pretty far, but at your marathon pace and during the middle of the week. So to me, that's a much, much bigger confidence booster than slogging through a 20-miler at 3 minutes slower than your marathon pace. That, to me, that doesn't even tell me really anything, only that you can actually cover 20 miles. So for the beginner, there tends to be a couple ways that we don't quite max out the benefits. The first is when the runner is low mileage and is just attempting to run a tempo. Sometimes these folks are have short, easy runs faster than their goal marathon pace. So there is a tendency to run the shorter marathon tempo runs at an even faster pace, which makes sense, right? Since this is supposed to be a workout. The logic is definitely there. However, the real problem is that the person's general endurance is not there. So I don't get too worked up about this early on because I know that when the mileage kicks in, paces have a tendency to work themselves out. One caveat to that is when we continue to force the paces that we were running before, and they aren't really truly where we should be at. That's when it gets into a problem. However, I think patience is key on tempo runs, and I would stress that these runners slow down on the tempo runs and try to learn what their actual race pace feels like. And it's easier to do that early on when the runs are shorter, because you're ultimately going to just pay a price when you get to the 8, 9, 10 mile tempo runs and you still go out too hard, and then you're going to crash and burn the last few miles, and it's going to be a very miserable experience. And also, you run the risk of getting hurt. The advanced runner can make these early runs quick as well, but it's typically because their early attempts are fairly short. So they've gone through this process before. 10 miles, they know 10 miles are going to be tough, but 4 miles is going to be pretty easy, and so they tend to get a little excited and run them quick. And to you, I would say the same thing. Slow it down. Focus on the pace early on. The sooner you can learn how to get into a rhythm and pace, the better off you're going to be on race day. And the bottom line is that the harder you make it early on in training, the earlier you get into cumulative fatigue, like we talked about before, and you run the risk of actual overtraining. You go well beyond the line of cumulative fatigue and into overtraining. So that's all about getting through what you need to in that early segment and building that foundation. Even though if the workouts are a little bit easier, you're setting the stage for the harder work that you're going to do the last 2 months. So just always keep that in mind. Now, you may experience the opposite. You may struggle early on to hit your goal marathon pace, and this may be true when someone is trying to make a big jump to another level. The faster you get, the tougher those adjustments become. A beginner may not even notice a 10-second a mile adjustment, as they are improved very rapidly. They'll be night and day in a couple months from when they started. Whereas an advanced runner may notice every little increase in pace. Like we talked about this before, when you talk about percent improvements, like a 5% improvement for a 4:30 marathoner is nothing. If I can just get them to run 10 miles more a week, they're gonna probably be 10% better. If you take somebody who's run 2:15 in the marathon if you can get them to improve 0.5%, that's going to be a significant increase in their performance. So it's all relative to where you're at on your running. So the point is that if you do struggle early on, don't give up on it. Your fitness on day one isn't going to be the same that your fitness is during the last 4 to 6 weeks of the marathon segment, right? So like just recently I had a gentleman email me, and he's like, he's running a marathon in June, and he's about 10 seconds a mile slow on some workouts now, and this was early, this was before February, so this was in January, meaning he has February, March, April, May, and then into June. So he literally probably had about 5 months to get from where he currently was at to where he wanted to be at. So it doesn't make sense to panic now when the ultimate goal is 5 months from now. What you do is you find out where you're at now, and you progress gradually. And that's essentially what he wanted to do. I think he was just more worried that he wasn't going to be able to do it, but he was definitely on the right track. He just needed to be patient and say, look at where he was at every 4 to 6 weeks. And if he was ready to make that jump up, he could make that jump up. If not, you just stayed there for another couple of weeks until you're ready to make that jump up. So that's the point. Your fitness now isn't going to be your fitness in 5 months. So don't freak out when it's a little bit harder early on. So let the pace come down naturally. If a number of weeks go by and you still simply can't get the pace down, then it might be simply a nudge to adjust your pace back a little bit, or just stay there for a few more weeks and just let your body dictate to where you're at. But now, on the other hand, don't use that as an excuse to hammer your tempo runs. Like, oh, this is what my body said. Well, if you're already making a big jump in your race goal, you don't need to make that even more. You're still going to be at the risk of overtraining, and then ultimately probably miss the goal you originally set for yourself. So it's not an excuse to put on the accelerator, but it is an excuse to say, hey, this is where I'm currently at. Let's gradually pick it up if I'm not quite where I wanted to be in the long term. So hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, strength workouts. At 10 seconds faster per mile than goal marathon pace, the initial thought a lot of times is that this is an easy workout, right? So the runner will be at least 15 to 20 seconds fast. They'll do this for a rep or two, and then they'll start that sharp decline into a botched workout, right? So ultimately we were too fast, and then we were too slow, and we were probably never actually right on pace at one point during the workout, right? So we ultimately didn't hit the workout at all. But these are deceivingly tough due to the higher volume and the short rest, and the gradually increasing lactate levels in the blood. So when fatigue hits on these, you become well aware, right? So I remember watching a few people do a 6x1 strength workout, and you're like, oh, this is so easy. The first two, they're hammering. They didn't even finish the workout because it was just even going from 10 seconds faster per mile to 20 seconds faster per mile put them over their lactate threshold, and they were toast. So you'll know when you do it. You don't need me to explain it to you. For beginners, yes, there are probably some gray area physiologically with these. However, the point of this is to get your higher blood lactate levels in the blood, and this will allow you to clear blood lactate at much better levels. You will also be at just below your lactate threshold, which is ultimately allow you to tolerate higher and higher levels of lactate in the future. So it's all about lactate clearance and lactate production. The lactate production isn't going to be super high, but you're going to be able to clear it out much faster. And ultimately what this means is, again, you're going to be able to run faster at a higher level for a longer period of time. And if you think about it, we're sparing carbohydrate and glycogen, which is where lactate comes from. You're setting yourself up to be a lean, mean aerobic machine. So the problem arises when you crank these too fast. And when you do that, you simply overload the body prematurely. The workout becomes survival, not training. Remember, we build fitness from the bottom up, which means we push thresholds up from the bottom. We do not pull them up from the top. Think about it this way: we can do a lot more work when we're just under the threshold than we can when we put ourselves over the threshold right away. And that's where speed comes in, right? So if we were to try to do a 6x mile and it's over our lactate threshold, that's too much volume. We can't do it, right? It's too much of a workload. But if we're just under that lactate threshold, we're still getting all the adaptations we need, and we can do a higher volume of work with little rest and really put ourselves in a great situation to have a great workout. Speed, on the other hand, is short intervals fast with a little bit longer rest, because the whole idea is to take us over that lactate threshold and put us in a position where we do have to suffer, but it's not for as long amount of time. Okay, so last but not least, I know that we have speed, and it's in the beginning of the segment. And to be honest, the speed is where the mistakes are made, and being at the beginning of the schedule can really dictate how the rest of the training will go. In the traditional sense, like 5K or 10K development, speed is more about developing top-end speed and VO2 max. Now, I'll be honest, if you're a beginner, you'll see an increase in your VO2 max simply by doing the schedule. You're at a position where you're gonna see improvements pretty much no matter what you do. So for advanced runners, we're looking at increasing VO2 max from 60 to 6. We're not looking to see an improvement from 60 to 62. Like, that's not going to do much of anything for us, right? That's not really going to take us anywhere for the marathon. In other words, the speed that we are doing is speed that is relative to the event we are training for. For the vast majority of people, this means about 10K pace. And what's the benefit in that? And we've talked about it before, but doing speed work really fast early in a segment can cause something called acidosis, or it's a changing of pH in the blood, and this can actually stunt aerobic development, because basically, for lack of a better term, it burns out enzymes and it doesn't allow mitochondria to fully adapt. So you really end up stunting your aerobic growth. The thing, though, is that this occurs at paces faster than 5K pace. So that's why if I back it off and stay at 10K pace, we're still going much, much faster than marathon pace, but we're not going so fast that we put ourselves at risk to do this. On the other hand, though, we want the speed, but we don't want to put it at the end of a marathon segment, because that doesn't make much sense either. 10K, we don't want to do 10K speed the last month of a marathon segment, because that's not really race specific, right? That's 5K, 10K specific. It's not marathon specific. So we want it, but we want it at the right time, and that best place to put it is early on. So that's the whole point of that, is so that we want speed. We don't want to put too fast, but we don't want to put it late in the segment. So that's why it's there. Side note, this is also why we don't like marathon after marathon, because you ultimately never do get to do any fast segments where you're doing things at VO2 max pace, or you're doing things at 5K pace. You're not doing those really gut-burning repeats on the track if you're just doing marathon after marathon after marathon. So that ultimately will hurt your development as well. So that's why we say, 3 marathons every 2 years, because it gives you a chance to have a segment or two where you can work on things you need that are weak to you. So that's why we do it. All right, so don't worry if you don't get into 5K paces, you're still going to get plenty of benefit from 10K pace. So for the first one, your muscle fiber recruitment will improve, right? So we're still recruiting fast twitch fibers. We can first recruit fast twitch fibers and intermediate fibers that may not have been used in a while. So that's, again, if you've done just marathon, and just mileage with no real speed, those fibers get dormant, and they just don't do anything. So we want to wake them up, and then we can start teaching them to look how we really want them to look. And that's like, if we can take a fast twitch and intermediate fiber, recruit it, we can now change it, because now it's getting exposed to all the aerobic work that we're doing, right? And it's not going to look exactly like a slow twitch fiber, but it's going to look a lot more like a slow twitch fiber. And so that just gives you more, quote unquote, firepower for when you're late in a race. So again, this is really about a little bit of a precursor work to when we do this strength workout. So if we can get those recruited and firing again, that's only going to help us for the strength workouts, right? And then it's only going to help us for the long tempo runs, and it's only going to help us for the faster long runs. So this is all early stuff that we're doing in foundational work that's going to prepare us down the road. And the key is that going faster isn't going to improve this. If we shock the body too much too soon, we'll stunt the very aerobic development we're trying to improve. So being patient here will be the key to a successful segment. And I stress that because a lot of you don't see that, and it really is the key to the segment. It is truly the foundation, being able to effectively handle all the other work that we will do later on. So it always comes back to that foundation that we have before we do the hard stuff. And so the last note I want to make about speed is the tougher we make the speed, the tougher we make the tempo, which makes the long run tougher. If we do this too much too soon, we put ourselves on a trajectory that we simply cannot maintain for 18 weeks. And this goes back to the idea of getting too fit too fast. This is the #1 reason people fail at this program. Part of that is cumulative fatigue and the idea that it's not a single workout that does us in. It's cheating the speed down a little bit, followed by a tempo that felt so good early on, followed by a long run where I just had to stay at the top end of my prescribed paces. We tend to maximize the paces we can early on because they're easier, but we fail to look at what those consequences are going to be later on. We fail to see what effect those are going to have on the next workout, the next week, the next month, and how we'll be coping when we get to the 6 to 8 week out mark. And then you'll really hate my guts, right? So in short, everything we do doesn't affect just today. Every day should be an opportunity to look at your plan and think, what do I need to get done today? Nothing more, nothing less, repeat. And it's boring, it's monotonous, but it's going to get you in the best shape of your life, especially for the marathon. So one thing I'll say on that, and this goes to where I'm talking about not every workout has to be important. I would pick out a couple workouts you know are going to be absolutely tough for you and put your focus on those. The workout or two before and the workout or two after that workout. You've got to go into the mindset, I just need to get this done. I don't need to crush it. And you put your emphasis on that one workout, because it is nice to put your emphasis on one workout every now and then and be like, okay, dang, I am fit, I'm ready to roll. But you can't do that day in and day out. If you put your emphasis on that one workout, your next day better be easy, your next long run better be easy, your next speed or strength workout better be easy. You better make sure you're recovered from that and not keep digging yourself a hole and trying to prove something to somebody else or yourself that every day is better than the next, because we know that you're going to get more fit. We know that you're going to be in a good position. We just have to stay within the parameters of what we're telling you what to do. And now that you know what you're actually getting out of that and what can happen if you get out of that, that will ideally teach you, say, okay, you live to fight another day. Or even, and that's the other thing too, is even if it's a bad workout, it's like we're doing workouts all the time. One bad workout means, okay, so only 99% of the rest of my stuff went okay. It's fine. Just you pick up the pieces and you move on. But, we can't get into this thing where every workout has to be our best workout. It's that Rolling Stones. You don't get what you want, you get what you need. In the tempo run, maybe you just get what you need for that day, and that's it, and you move on. And you don't stress about it, you don't worry about it, you don't think that your race segment's over. It is what it is, and you just move forward. So, and I'm only telling you this just because I've spent so much of my own career kind of fighting that as well. And I think that, and once I learned that lesson, I feel like now my workouts were just more relaxed, they were smoother, and I was less stressed overall because I wasn't putting myself into a frenzy over every single workout. And I think that's what a lot of people do. They put their life and death on how well that next workout's going to go, and you just don't need to do that. So, okay, so I'll get off my soapbox. All right, last few lines here. So knowing the purpose of what you're doing, as well as making a few mistakes along the way, are just great learning points. Just don't keep making the same mistake over and over. I can't stress that enough. I see it all the time. It's like beating your head against the wall. One thing I have found that has worked in this program is program your workouts into GPS. So whether it's Garmin or whatever, Garmin, you can go into Connect and you can set up a workout. And yes, it does take a little bit of time, but it can keep you on point. And I remember someone saying to me, but the beeping is so annoying. That's the point. You're learning how to control your pace, and there's nothing better to teach you your pace than an annoying beep that will not go away until you hit the pace range you set. So yes, it's annoying, but that is the point. It's going to teach you. All right. Uh, I have found this to be very successful long term. I feel like you naturally start. You don't want to be annoyed, so you just start naturally running the paces that you need to. Um, the other thing I found is rewarding yourself, but the only way you can get that is if you hit your paces for a week or 2 weeks. Personally, I don't find this as effective because I would probably just go buy whatever I wanted anyway. But the point is to get creative. Find something, make it a game. How close can I come to pace? Whatever works for you. It is work, but over time, you become a natural, and those annoying beeps will only be a figment of your imagination. So anyway, those are the lessons I have learned the hard way over my first 85,000 miles of running and observing for my first 12 years of coaching. So hopefully you can take something away from that and be learning paces and getting what you need out of your workouts instead of making every workout your world beater workout. So I think if we learn those lessons, you couple that with getting too fit too fast and recognizing the dangers of that, taking that early part of the segment, really what you just need to do, building that foundation, setting yourself up for the hard work you're going to do the last couple months of that segment, you're going to be in much better position. You're going to truly get into cumulative fatigue and not into overtraining. Your 10-day taper will work, and then your marathon will be good. As long as you have a good plan, you get lucky with weather, you have a decent setup, you're going to be fine. But the training part of it, that will not be your worry at that point. So, but I think that's important. I think the last two I've done are very important, especially for people who tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. A lot of those mistakes are what we've talked about in this and what we talked about in the adapting to training posts. So I think there's a lot to take from there for most people who follow us. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you later.